What we'd like to do is look at ourselves on the screen. That's not what we want to do. Yeah, it's the ultimate selfie. You just sit there and talk the whole time. All right, what we're looking to do is basically had a few years of this class being what we would consider to be like a facilitated discussion, where we are talking to each other in such a way that we try to develop the ideas that are found at the bases of the questions that a lot of people ask. This time, what we are starting to do this year is a little bit different. We're going to change the format of the class a little bit. We're going to change a little bit about how we record what's going on in the class. We'll change the interaction in order to pursue something that I've wanted to do for a little while. We've always been a class that welcomes, and will continue to be a class that welcomes, Christians, atheists, agnostics, Jews, Muslims, Hindus. In fact, here are my boys right here. Thank you guys. Good to see you. Effie and Asher, who are coming from a fairly Orthodox Jewish position. We'll talk to them, speculating exactly what Orthodox means. They get to say all that. But we intend to continue to be welcoming in all those respects and discuss all these sides. But what we're going to try to do this year is, over the course of this year, is we're going to make what I would consider to be the strongest possible case that can be made for the truth of theism first, and then Christian theism second. And as you can see by, as an example, Asher and Effie and Dennis and others in class, this is not intended to be something where we lay out the case in an environment only friendly to the viewpoint that's being espoused. The goal here is to have it challenged and rigorously challenged. And so, again, big thanks to you guys for showing up. As an example, these gentlemen, under probably one of the coolest handles I've seen, you're still doing Rob Zombie, I assume, yeah, are some online debaters who do do a terrific job of challenging Christians online and saying, here's some holes in your argument, here's some problems with what you're saying. And so we want to continue to do that kind of thing in Solid Ground. But I'm going to try to sit and make the strongest possible case that I can, that is to say, the case that I happen to believe. You actually get to choose, and this is Peter's idea, and so Peter will also have to help facilitate this a little bit. You also get to choose in what mode you engage. So we won't do it this time, we'll break it up next time, but next time you're going to see the class tables divided into 3 sections. Apparently, if you haven't noticed, there are going to be a fair amount of engineers, introverts in this room, and so as a result, this will make sense to most, but it's almost a gamer view. The tables on this side are going to be what Peter calls easy mode. Easy mode means that you can come into class, you don't have to do anything, you can be audience if you want. You are welcome to participate as much as you wish, but there are basically no expectations at all that you will do anything other than monitor at a minimum. Sleeping mode happens outside, but anything just down to the threshold of sleeping, all the way up to as active a listening, and of course posing any questions that you want. You're free to ask any questions from the easy mode side, but the chair, so to speak, will not direct any difficult questions at you. There won't be any back and forth. Normal mode will be the middle. Normal mode is one where you would expect, probably for those who've been in Solid Ground before, typical of what happens in Solid Ground. Some back and forth, some parry or post kind of stuff, some questions to you to answer your own, to justify some of your own beliefs, etc. Hard mode is if you want to enter into, like, no joke, Socratic dialogue or debate or whatever else. So if you're sitting in the hard mode table, I may turn and say, all right, on the Christian side, you're sitting in hard mode, here's a challenge to you, go and answer it. And in some cases, if I get tripped up trying to explain something, I may just turn to you and be like, can you help me out with this and explain? And of course, wherever gentlemen like these wish to sit, you can of course take up the hard mode. I imagine you probably sit in hard mode seats anyway, but you can sit anywhere that you want. And we'll also have I will not be the only one teaching this class, so there'll be some, or facilitating. We'll be going in and out. Asher and Effie will do some presentation as well when it comes to the talking about Judaism portion and other topics if they so wish. Same thing for Dennis, same thing for anybody else in here who would like to justify some of the other viewpoints we're going to lay out in opposition to our arguments about Christian theism. Okay, So you can get to choose easy mode, normal mode, or hard mode, but if you choose hard mode, come in ready to go. And I think the advantage here will be, there are folks who've been in this class for a long time. There are folks who've been in this class who are very capable of articulating their views, and the format of the class has just really not allowed that. The new format of the class will allow that, and in fact will expect it if they would like to do so themselves. Okay, so that's one change. Another change will be a little bit of the formatting of how we do timing. It is the case that I knew we'd have a little difficulty this time, but we would like to start as close to 9 a.m. as we possibly can. So I know me, 100% me, I've walked back to basically we get started at 9:10. If you don't mind, do try to be in place at 9 because we would like to kick it off to maximize the amount of time that we have here. So thank you for doing that. And if you do drift in late, that's not a problem at all. Just know that you will be missing. We'll actually have started class at 9 o'clock, starting next time. Okay. A couple other things to mention, some administrative stuff. We have a Facebook page. The principal way that we share news in this class goes off of this Facebook page. The account is a strange account. We have some other types of accounts, but this one seems to be the one that we keep going with. But if you're on Facebook, if you don't object to it, this is just a good way. Do get on and link up to this one. I can be your only friend if you want. But Scott is, again, a class of introverts, like you can tell by my Facebook page, if I had one, other than this one, what an introvert I would be. But this came from a time when Facebook wasn't doing the kinds of pages they are now, so this is a little bit older account. Scott is the first name, Solid Ground is the last name. So if you go searching for it, you have to search Scott Solid Ground, and that'll pop up. And this is where we'll put out news announcements, outlines, curricula, syllabus.
I noticed the pronunciation. Yeah, the pronunciation, what's that?
It's spelt Scott Solid Ground, but it's pronounced Throat Warbler Mangrove. To those of you that are Monty Python fans, that'll ring familiar to you. So there, yeah, I would like to say I was the first person to do that. I was obviously not. A resource that we use in this class fairly frequently, this comes in both app and web page, BibleHub.com. The reason that we like this one is as an example, that if you pick a particular verse, this is a verse that most people haven't heard of, John 3:16. I won't read it here, but one of the interesting things about it is if you pick a particular verse, it'll break out every translation side by side, or right next to each other here, so that you can see the differences between translation. For those that are not aware, oftentimes the interpretation and the translation follows sometimes by the theology of the people writing that particular book. So this lets you see at least several translations in parallel. It shows you a study Bible view on the other side. It gives you cross-references right there. So a lot of the things that you normally want to look up for looking things up in context, which we and others believe are very important. What's your rule, 20 and 20? Is that right? What's your context rule, 20 and 20? 20 verses before, 20 verses after. If you're not reading it like that, you're not reading in context. So saith Asher. They have another couple of things that are good in here, I think. So let me pull up I'll show this other one because it'll kind of do both. But let's say you have a verse in Exodus. You'll see up at the top in kind of brown up there, it says parallel, which gives you the verses in parallel. Sermons, topical, Strongs, that gives you concordance and dictionary-ish kind of stuff. Commentary, you can pull up commentary there. Interlinear and Hebrew, basically in this case, do the same. But it'll show you the verse broken out in actual Hebrew, for those of you that read Hebrew, and a English transliteration of the Hebrew. And then one of the neat things here is that you can click on the particular number up there, and it'll show you the concordance entry for it, and it'll show you fairly good word study data on it, forms and transitions. And over here on the right side, oh, sorry, it'll give you a concordance. Wow, okay. Sorry, on the right side, it'll give you a concordance as well. And then you can link to, it'll bring up other instances of where this is used, frequency in which it's used, and where else it's used in the Bible. So I find this like a good, there's a better resource out there, but for studying at least Christian scriptures and Jewish scripture, it seems to me to be a fairly good place to do it. If you guys know of any other resources you want to mention or kick up, please let us know, and we can post them on the page as well. Okay, so that's a resource we'll use in class. Something else I would be remiss not to note, and maybe in terms of full disclosure, I sit on the board of Reasonable Faith. Reasonable Faith is Dr. William Lane Craig's ministry. He's a Christian apologist, if you haven't heard of him, whose probably his most famous stuff are these debates. So he kind of got his name by being a debater, and he's debated such luminaries as Peter Atkins, Sean Carroll, the physicist and cosmologist, Anthony Flew, this is Christopher Hitchens, Peter Milliken, Stephen Law, Lawrence Krauss, you may have heard of, Alex Rosenberg from Duke University, Victor Stinger. Basically, any of the four horsemen, this is older now, but the four horsemen of New Atheism, he's debated all of them. Richard Dawkins famously declined to debate with them and was kind of called out by some of his Oxford colleagues on that. But he is a debater and theologian with impeccable academic credentials, writes a lot of stuff. You can see even his scholarly works here, where he writes on a number of topics, and these are stuff that are published in peer-reviewed journals, that kind of thing. So his Defenders course, which he is a kind of consistently running thing that he does, talks about a lot of the key and core doctrines of Christianity. A lot of this class's material is derivative of this information, not solely, but you'll find a lot of what we talk about in here is fairly well articulated and organized on this webpage. And especially if you want to debate it, if you can effectively beat these arguments, you probably effectively beat our arguments as well. Hint, hint, foot stomp. Okay. So this one, it can be, and it is downloadable as an app, but it's reasonablefaith.com, all one word, Reasonable Faith. But in reasonablefaith.com, you can find those materials as well. Okay. So one other administrative note, against my better judgment and personal leanings and tendencies, we have a social event happening on Saturday at our place out just on the west edge of Ashburn, Brambleton area. Would you like to, can you make any announcement about that? Ashley's running it for us, basically.
The sign up is on Facebook, both on his page and the community page. If you have any trouble finding it, I can send you an email or a text with the link. An easy email to remember is Ashley Ramsey at restedbible.org. If you don't have Facebook, just send me an email there. Let us know if you have any allergies or food restrictions, and we can try to incorporate that into the menu.
This Saturday, this coming Saturday at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 7 or so. And dinner will be served informally. And then we have, I joke, for those that want to socialize and have a good time, we have 10 acres and some kind of adventurous stuff to do. And then those that are introverts, there are little nooks in the house, and it is an introvert safe zone so that you can go sit and read a book off the library shelf if you wish, or alternately talk to the one person that you want to talk to about whatever topic you want to talk on as well. So there will be no forced social interaction. And hopefully that includes me as well. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about where we're going to go. Next time that you're here, we're going to hand out, Peter was kind enough to do a lot of prep work in advance of this class in helping us write down a curriculum for this year. So we will hand out our best guess at a curriculum this year that we will try to stick fairly closely to. Typically, we have let ourselves range as quickly as far as we wish to in the interest of answering all the questions. We will still defer in total questions more than we will to sticking to schedule, but we'll still try to drive and stay on schedule because if we want to make the complete case, it does take us about a year to do that most effectively. Okay, so we'll hand that kind of stuff out next time, and we'll also publish it online. We will, Amanda Lacey has done a terrific job of So there is an additional resource here. It's solidground.restonbible.org. And it is if you don't want to go do the Facebook thing, she has oops, did I do that wrong?
You did
.com, right, sorry, thank you. Normally, we don't have this many difficulties with organization, but it is the first day. All right, all of the class material here, all of these particular videos are up here and now fairly well organized, very well organized. So if you miss anything, or you want to go over anything, or you want to deep dive into anything and pick it apart, this is the place to go to start to do it. All right, I think that probably covers most of our administrative stuff. We'll talk a little bit about what we want to do in terms of, this is Peter's work here that we're displaying. Some of this obviously I've done out of order. There is no actual students' responsibilities. You can do whatever you want, but Peter thought that this would be helpful to you. You will not be held to account for failing to do this one. If you don't bring your pen and paper and notebook, we'll still let you sit here if you wish. Yeah, there will be. Yeah, Peter gives out gold stars at the end, so keep a close eye on that. And if you're going to put an polished apple on anybody's desk, I would suggest doing it in front of Peter's. No, what I will promise you is this: to the best of my ability, knowing that everybody has limitations in this area, I will attempt to hear every question and facilitate every question with maximal fairness from the side that it's being asked from and the side that it's being asked against. So I'm trying to play I will go into two modes. One mode is arbitrator or adjudicator, and another mode is arguer. So I'll tell you when I'm in each of those modes, hey, I'm going to take the position of the following belief system. I'll make that argument. But in the interim, I would like to do as maximal a job as I possibly can of being fair to both sides of whatever debate, point, argument, premise, set of arguments is being forwarded. And if I'm not, I do beg that you will object and say, I don't think that you're playing the fair judge in this part, and here's why. And I will absolutely make time for that. So at no time will I quash that kind of thing. That is part and parcel of what this course is about. Secondly, the other thing we'll do is I will promise to the best of my ability to answer questions and facilitate the answer to questions very deeply. One of our reasons for having built this class was I feel that Christianity, and especially Sunday school classes, Bible study classes or whatever, do not do a good job of answering questions. There's a lot of brushing aside. There's a lot of, well, it says it in Scripture, and that's just the way that it is. There's a lot of attribution of like, well, if you don't believe that, maybe you're not a Christian. That's not how this class works. If we can't go all the way down to bedrock on this one, down to axioms and premises, and then build the arguments up from there, this class is not doing the job it was intended to do. So it is my responsibility that if you ask a question, to get down to the absolute bottom of the question to the best of our possible knowledge. Or best of our possible abilities. Okay, it is also the case that, let me talk now probably about core business. What is the mission of Solid Ground, and most specifically, what is our mission, our goal over the course of this year? Here's what we want to do. We want to take a finite set of time, knowing that this is never enough time to do all that you want. But we want to talk to two broad populations, and forgive me for making one of them too broad. But basically, there are people who are Christians who, for their whole life, have been in the church or have been in the church for a significant portion of their life, and who have learned and believed a certain series of things. My going in position is that most Christians, 99% of Christians, don't have good reasons or don't have good justifications for what it is they believe. And if you push on them, then you will find fairly quickly that the knowledge does not go as deep as one would have hoped. Now, that doesn't mean that it's false. The same thing can probably be done to Jews of various types, Muslims of various types, of agnostics and atheists and believers in various different religions. So we don't want to judge people by either the least informed or the marginally informed or only the partially informed. We want to judge each one of these belief systems by its core tenets and by its best arguments. And so what we're attempting to do here is make the best arguments for Christianity. Part of that view, best arguments for Christianity, Christian theism set of topics will include talking about other religions. And we are not going to caricature other religions in here. It's not going to be like, well, Jews believe this, Muslims believe this, Mormons believe this, whatever. That's not how we're going to do it. If we can't, my first choice is to have experts come in and represent their viewpoint. Experts that we haven't chosen because they are easy punching bags. We have chosen the experts because they do the best job of articulating their view of anybody that I happen to have met. And hence the reason that these gentlemen are here. They do an outstanding job of representing their viewpoint. And so we're not interested in knocking down straw men here. We're interested in seeing the arguments and the data come into the arena and see how they do against each other. Because to me, that's one way to determine what is true. Okay, so knowing that that's one of the things that we will do, our major goal over the course of this year is to do, we'll say maybe 4 things. Number 1, we want to articulate, we want to draw out what is it that are the core views of beliefs, period. When I say that, I mean belief systems. So let me back up and say it a better way. I want to know, how is it when we say that we know something to be true, or we say something, we believe something is true, what exactly does that mean? What do we actually think? So of a number of things that you might say, these are things that I know to be true. It may be the case that when we run into those, that you fairly rapidly say, well, I wouldn't say I know that to be true, like not 100%. Well, what percent do you know it to be true? Well, I think it's likely more true than it's not. So when we get to understanding what we hold as true, what are the standards? What are the standards of what we call true? And what are the processes that we use to judge claims that are saying that they are truths? So really, I have 2 major questions to start with, and these are the things that we'll start with. What is the process we use to determine truth? What are the standards by which we use to measure truth? Why are we doing that first? And then Steve. Why are we doing that first? The reason we're doing that first is this. If you come in with an unlevel playing field, if you come in with a playing field that's tipped in one direction, if you come in with a set of prejudices, especially if you're part of the system that judges it, then you're not going to come to the right answer. Or if you do come to the right answer, it won't be because you've shown that one argument or one system of belief or thought is better than another. Okay. I think it's easy for us to all say everybody wants to compete on a level playing field, but I will be surprised if over the course of the next class that we have, you don't come to realize that a lot of what it is that you and I hold to believe to be true is in fact not at all competing on a level playing field, especially compared to other beliefs that we claim that we hold. Steve.
I was just curious, that also is figuring out what is priority in terms of belief.
Yeah, so yeah.
So like certain things I may or may not believe and I may not care.
All right. Hold on to that question for 1 second. I'm going to see what this comment is, and we're going to go back to that, and I didn't pay Steve for this transition. Yes, sir. Did you have a question? Comment?
I just wanted to that experiential knowledge is not inherently a judge of exactly what you're talking about. So basically, I was saying that God does not inherently have to be in the process of knowing in the way that you might classify a sinner as knowing something in order for God to know or not know something or other. So with respect to observational knowledge and truth, there's a notion of experiential knowledge with respect to sensory conditioning that is independent of an observer that we would classify as God. So
Yes, and we will get to exactly that kind of thing when we talk in some depth on epistemology. Now, it is the case in deference. Let me make one other caveat. In easy mode, normal mode, and hard mode, those are modes of engagement in the class. Those are not necessarily, those should not be correlated to how much you know. That should be how much you wish to involve yourself, particularly in the way that this class is going. So there won't be some assumption of like, well, people that don't know much about this topic sit over here, and people that know a lot about this topic sit over here. That's not the case. You sit where you feel like that day. In fact, if you want to switch one day to the next, you want to switch in the middle of class, feel free to do that type of thing too, depending on what, how you feel at the time. Or who makes a comment. And it'll be particularly telling when someone makes a comment and like 3 people walk over to hard mode and they're like, all right, it's time to put on the gloves. It's also the case that I would say you want to, I recognize that there are going to be varying interests in this class. There are people in this class who are interested in writing papers and doing intellectual academic work at the postgraduate level on the scintillatingly just absolutely breathtakingly wonderful, everybody wants to be a part of it, dry topics of epistemology and some of the deeper areas of philosophy or whatever. For those guys and gals, that stuff is what they can sit and talk about and want to talk about for hours and hours and hours at a time. There are other people in the class that would use that as an absolutely perfect, non-drug-related replacement for Ambien. And so, we want to be fair to both sets of people in the class, the people who are like, I didn't come in here for a class in epistemology. Is this a Bible study or not? Is this a Sunday school or not? This is not intended to be a hardcore class in philosophy. It's also not intended to be the easy, you just walk into it anytime and don't, you're not going to be challenged in your thinking, normal Sunday school class, right? So that it's going to hit the spectrum. So at some points, this class will hit some fairly deep points, but I will try to go down to those depths as quickly as possible that satisfies the philosophical side as much as they can be satisfied by a finite treatment. And then we'll come back up to a level that'll be hopefully appealing to all. And if we're doing a good job of doing that, do raise your hand and say, hey, you're losing me here. We're going too deep and too long on this subject, and we will respond to that as well. Okay. So one of the things that we do want to talk about when we talk about, this class will talk a little bit about, warning. Here's some caveats and warnings. We are going to talk philosophy in this class. We're going to use words like metaphysics in this class. We're not going to use them as though you know what they are. We're going to explain all of these to some fairly deep level so that we have to get you familiar enough with them so that you can use them. And we will avoid academic terms whenever possible. So we're not going to bury you in this dry academic language. But by the same token, we want to use the tools that have been developed over hundreds and thousands of years, our best tools to examine these things. Okay. So let me pivot a little bit from saying what we are going to do and now step into doing it a little bit. So without having divided the class up into easy, hard, and whatever mode, just do it from your seat as it is. Somebody tell me, if you would be so kind. Remember, I have said that there are 2 things that we want to talk about. One of them is the process of discovering truth.
This is significant. That's a blank page.
Not anymore.
Wait, let her zoom out.
Yeah.
It's not really.
Now let me, I want to talk a little bit, let's talk about this right now, but let me also lay down a rule. And it's not a rule that I'm imposing. It's a rule that I will be very surprised if any of you disagree with. And if you do let me know and let's have that discussion now, because we're going to run this class on a particular, we won't have many rules in this class, but this will be one of them. So, the normal rules in this class should be the same that are common to all treatment of one human being to another, right? Let's be respectful, let's be kind, let's be loving, all that other kind of stuff. But by all means, argue to the greatest of your ability. If you do not think that it's wrong to be a hypocrite, make your argument now. And the reason I say that is, and I don't mean that, what I mean by hypocrite is, if you say, I'm going to apply to you a standard of truth that I'm not going to apply to myself, that's a form of hypocrisy. Another form of hypocrisy is I'm going to hold this belief, I will hold a be prepared for that. We're going to do that because it was helpful in my own view. But ultimately, I want to ensure that you are playing with the level playing field yourself, and that when we deal with everybody else, we use the same standards. You may adopt whatever standards you want, but make sure you articulate it and make sure that you apply it fairly and evenly.
I think it's okay for me to be a hypocrite, but I don't think anyone else.
Exactly. Peter, by the way, if you are not a fan of the WWE or WWF or whatever they are now, WWG, Peter is the master of what we call the tag team top rope approach, where you haven't been paying attention, he jumps in off the top rope and hits you. So keep an eye on Peter. He's a lurker. But yes, it is the case that all of us, Peter, should of course be as honest with ourselves and others as we can possibly be. And by the way, I'm not asking you to do something that's easy. You'll hear by the next class where I will tell you sometimes where I have failed to do that and may still fail to do that. I think we all do that. I think we all actually believe different things with different standards. But we want to try to not do that because I think we can all agree that's not the best way to get grade A thinking done.
With respect to the conditioning of hypocrisy, the idea is that the condition of one's heart and mind stands in majority power over the notion of hypocritical standards applied by outside observers. So it's one of those things where it's like if the condition of an individual is such that their knowledge and capability is I don't know, most easily put probably next level in juxtaposed to another individual who would be new to the faith or new to an understanding that is different from their own, that the conditions of hypocrisy are sort of more hardened for the entrant than typically they are for the individual already in the faith. And so it's one of those things where, like, if you were to look at a good judge who had farther sight for the path of an individual, then actually has an ability to appear hypocritical to the individual observer with shorter sight than the individual would know with respect to the outside observer with higher capabilities.
And that may be the case, but at a minimum, what I would like to say is let's try to make that point as irrelevant as possible by doing the following things. One, worry less about judging other people, worry about your own standards. Am I being fair? And then if you do feel that, hey, this guy's using different standards, he's being unfair, she's being unfair, articulate that, and I'll try my best in arbiter mode to explain why I think you're right or why I think that you're mistaken. So we'll treat that in two separate ways in deference to that point.
Can I start?
Shoot.
All right, so the process of determining the truth, for me, is figuring out the definition of truth, and so but not going completely off the rails in terms of metaphysical.
Yep.
Whatever it is, I was just thinking of like a common, like one possible truth would be like, an example would be gravity. Apple falls from the tree. We see that. So whatever kind of truth that represents, the phenomenon
Okay.
of that, it is one kind of truth. Maybe it's the same as other what we would call metaphysical truths, like the existence of God. That's, if that is true, that seems to be kind of a different truth.
Are there types, to Steve's point, are there types of truth? Let me give you an example. Are there religious truths and are there scientific truths?
Yes.
Why? Why can you not make one circle and say that there's truth in here And inside this circle, there's no difference between scientific truths and metaphysical truths or religious truths. No, shoot, yeah, fire away.
I would say in religious and truth, there are things that can't be explained, but scientific truths are all about things that are explainable. Like, not everyone can say, oh, hey, I saw an angel go cold portal or something like that. And in science, like, oh, well, I just found out how many grams of gravity are in each person's,
Mass or something like that, yeah. Okay, well, let me challenge that for a second. Let's talk, we've mentioned gravity here twice. Do we know scientific truths? We'll say that there's such a category. And what we say is, okay, scientific truths have to be ultimately completely explicable. Otherwise, they don't count. Do we know what powers gravity? Right? You know, the gravitational equation out there talks about the force of gravity, and it'll tell you that you've got, you know, these G, and you've got some mass 1, you've got some mass 2, and then you've got a radius between them. And that describes how the force varies over time. That doesn't in any way tell you what gravity is. It doesn't tell you where this constant comes from. So can science tell you right now what powers gravity? No. No, in fact, it can't. So so I take your point. Your point, though, is in truths that we label as scientific truths, what we normally say is, I used a particular process to come to these particular truth claims. Is it the case that religious truths are not empirical, cannot be empirically derived? Is it the case that they can't be testable? I'll bet you these gentlemen will make some arguments at some point, if we brought up the point, about, hey, there are people that claim that King David never lived, no such person, or whatever else. There and say, no, I've got a biblical account that says so. They're going to pull out stuff done by archaeological societies in Israel and from others that have made discoveries that are going to provide evidence for the physical evidence for the claim that David was whatever else. So Dennis, and then
Scientific truth is a misnomer or oxymoron. Science doesn't claim to know any truths, absolute truths.
So I'm with Dennis, and I'll say, or at least in this far, I would say, to me, a scientific truth is simply a truth that we established by using the method of science. Now the question is, are religious truths, therefore, truths that we established by using the method of religion? You know, no, I think not. I mean, maybe there are some that are like that, but there are some truths that are not. The truth of the reliability of Hebraic scripture. There are some who will make mystical claims there. There are some who will use kind of mystical or religious arguments there. There's some people who use archaeological evidence to do the same. So maybe we say something like this. What if we say something like, there is stuff that is true. All right? There's stuff that's true, and anything outside of that is not true. So I'll say something like this. We'll use Aristotle's definition, when we talk about truth, what we're really talking about is a statement. It's a value of a statement, right? I can't turn around and say something like it doesn't make any sense to say this iPhone is true, right? What does it mean that this is true? Now I might say something like this is real. Now I've made a truth claim, okay? It is the case that this iPhone that I'm holding in my hand exists. That's a claim to truth. That can either be true, it's right, or it's false. It's an illusion. It's not really an iPhone or some kind of magic trick that I'm doing. But that is a truth claim. So when we talk about true, what we're really doing is talking about claims made by people. Truth is saying about something that it is. Now that sounds needlessly philosophical, but all he's really saying is, when you make a truth claim, if it is correct, if it describes what's real, then that's what we mean by true. If what something that's real that isn't, then that's what we mean by false. Under that kind of definition, there are a group of statements, a group of propositions that would be considered true, and there are a group of propositions that would be considered false. And then there are propositions that maybe can be both, has to do with how they're worded. You know what so that is where we want to be very careful. they're true or they are truth, are either true or they are not. Well-formed claims.
So under that mode of thinking.
Oh, sorry, I skipped one and then,
I was just going to make the point that, like, I think the circle of truth, and you're talking metaphysical or religious piece, I think science catching up as we. It's.
what you're saying. Are you saying, so here we'll make a wedge.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are scientific truths. Are they truths that cannot be, when you say they're scientific, you mean that they have to be derived by a scientific method, or do you mean that they apply to some physical subset?
So you can do an experiment to prove or deny them, right?
Okay.
And then you've got metaphysical stuff like spirits and energy and all kinds of other stuff that we don't really necessarily have a scientific understanding of. Per se.
Yes.
May in the future, as we're getting smarter on subatomic particles or whatever it may be, you know what I mean? So science is catching up.
Well, before I agree to that, let me ask you about this statement. The speed of light is constant in a one-way direction for all observers.
Are we talking about any room or?
Speed of light, direction. A metaphor. Why is it not a scientific truth?
It's only relative. It's only Einstein's relativistic definition of truth.
We're talking
As you get into quantum mechanics and what lies even beyond quantum mechanics, that may or may not be true.
Okay. What else? Anything else about this?
Well, I was just curious if the fact that you would need to have different observers, and if there's a limitation to having different observers, therefore, how could you outside of kind of inference?
On what is this, what theories are based on this truth claim? Do you know?
non-confidence in the universe.
All our current knowledge of physics with respect to special and general relativity specifically are based on that truth claim. How is that truth claim established? Anybody know?
Yeah, so the truth claim is
more generally established by convergence. So the idea is that there's no inherent proof of that particular methodology more than what it is to observe pragmatically the functional application of the leveraging of that particular statement. And so what ends up happening?
Sort of. So it's the case that this statement not only is, so the first part of your statement there is dead on. It's further the case that this statement strictly cannot be proven scientifically. And by scientifically, I mean using the scientific method. This is an axiom that Einstein uses, on which he based all the rest of it. If this may not be true, and if it's not true, all the physics that we do right now fall apart in many ways. My point is, this is a truth that, do you put it in the scientific truth wedge?
I do, because I think it's evolving, and I think that our scientific understanding is our construct for understanding the world, the universe, all that stuff, right? It's constantly evolving. It will catch up to the big piece. It'll eventually, well, it may not. It'd be great if it eventually caught up to the big piece of the pie. God's the only one who knows the big piece of the pie. Science is wholly unequipped. Because if it was, there would never be any debate about the existence of God, religion, any of these other questions that we had.
Okay.
If you could scientifically prove all the things in the Bible, then you wouldn't have people, in two different camps.
Okay, I got you. What else? Good. Look, discussion. That's what we're looking for.
So was just going to say real quick that it's maybe another way to look at it that kind of led us in a way by saying there might be different kinds of truths, and maybe I'll just walk back. and say maybe there's different ways of trying to understand truth.
Okay.
And so in respect of like, did this person do this on a given day? That's not repeatable, so the scientific method is applicable, maybe. But there's other methods that may be applicable.
Okay.
And so maybe there's just different kinds of ways to ascertain truth claims, as you were saying. And so you just need, it's kind of like, unit conversions. Are you using the right units?
Yes.
You're trying to mix and match. It's not going to make sense.
Okay, so the
Maybe
first,
there's things that
sorry.
are outside of that our ability at this point to detect and understand.
Okay, so now we're getting down to brass tacks a little bit on how is it that what methods are we going to use? So let me ask this one. In the what methods are we going to use, would you agree with this statement right here? We should use the scientific method to determine facts and theories about the physical world. Right? I mean, newsflash to any of us who've had to go to school at all in our lives, like this is on what we operate when it comes to secular education at a minimum. So let's say that that's true. We should use a scientific method to make truth claims. We should use a scientific method to make truth claims. Is the truth of that statement empirically established or establishable? All right, so science has got a little bit of a problem if you're going to define science as a unique method for discovering truth that is any of this metaphysical nonsense, doesn't need any philosophy, doesn't need any logic, doesn't need anything else. This right here is a metaphysical statement. It is not a statement that is physically derived and is in fact not about only physical things. Dennis.
Experimentally establishable. Nobody's ever created a perfect vacuum.
Well, even speed of light, a vacuum of a certain density, is that it would still be, relativity still assumes that the speed of light in normal interstellar space is the same. Based in the ability to make observations particularly from different. It is impossible to determine whether light that moved from this frame to that frame and from this frame back, whether it happened at one speed in one direction and another speed in another direction. We don't know. There's no way it is conceptually impossible to determine that. So this is an axiom.
I'm sorry to add to the confusion, but with the speed of light, if it's within the universe, sometimes the star will go out. However, if we see the light from that star, and it, years ago, from the spot it was in, because like light travels.
Yes, that's absolutely right. In fact, that's how we currently date when things happen. We say we think that this happened, we think this star is at this distance, and light takes this long from us to there. The difficult thing, the thing that we can never actually experimentally do, bit of a mind blower if you haven't had to think about this before. There's nothing that says, there's no law of nature that isn't an axiom. I mean, it seems like a reasonable thing to say. Light is long to travel from there to here. That seems reasonable, right? Why wouldn't we say that? That's strictly unprovable. There are people who actually argue, no, it would take us 100,000 light years to go from here to that star, but it only takes 3 minutes for light to go from that star to here. That way, it's impossible to prove otherwise. And I just bring this up, not because I want to get into a discussion about special relativity here, but merely to say, Einstein himself will tell you that that is an axiom, that it's unprovable.
One of the interesting things, however, is if you were to create somehow an experiment
that could leverage planetary gravity in a sufficient fashion that you could counter the individual effects on the planetary elements, and yet establish a beam of light or like a ray of light between two observers. The idea is that ray of light will eventually reach the other observer if cast in the proper direction, right? But the idea is that the ability to gauge the time span between the first cast and the observation is actually independent of that statement. So the idea is that like the relative speed of light actually has to do with the wavefront rather than the waveform. And so it's one of those things where, like, with respect to that axiom, the perspective on the actual ray of light is what Einstein is talking about. He's talking about with respect to when you would be able to observe a particular ray of light originally cast from the source, rather than the action occurring within the ray of light. So
if I understand what you're saying, right, ultimately what drove Einstein to talk about this stuff, and it's not a class of relativity, we'll get off this topic in 1 second, is what he's saying is, observationally speaking, there's no way to establish absolute simultaneity, that there's a relativity to simultaneity. In terms of waveform versus wavefront, that's really just picking. Have an interval, you've got a point, so that you're specific about what you're saying. But some of Einstein's beliefs in this one came out of this observational positivist approach that nobody believes anymore. And in fact, Einstein, many people realized that it was kind of bankrupt when he started working on general relativity. There were problems with the philosophy behind special relativity. And some people say he kind of matured out of that view. Dennis and then Peter. Yeah.
The speed of light is dependent upon time. We don't even know if time exists.
Well, we'll get into that later. And gentlemen, to the comments I made last week on that exact subject.
With God being omnipresent, would God be an objective observer?
If you're gonna make God physically present, then yes. Now, to this point, and the last point I promise on relativity for today's class, hopefully, there is a absolute reference frame that people use. When you hear physicists say things like, the universe is 13.78 billion years old, the person who understands relativity theory, their first question should be, for whom? Because you guys have seen the movie Interstellar or something like that, where you go down to this planet and 3 hours pass for these people, and it's like 20 years for the guy in orbit type of thing, which is not exactly how it works, because he's in orbit, he'd be getting closer to the source. But ultimately, you have to ask the question, for whom? When you hear that number, that's to some sort of cosmic universal time. That is to say, relative to observers that are motionless, for observers who are motionless relative to the expansion of space. 13.78 billion years would have passed. That's what that statement actually means. So it's important to make those distinctions when you're talking about these things. But let's get off the physics side and talk about the what are we talking about here side. To the question that we're talking about, the process of discovering truth, are there types of truth? All of this discussion that you just heard, which is very good discussion on its own merits, all of it has to do with, notice what was going on here. How do we establish something that we want to say is true? This is what the speed of light is, right? This is a scientific claim. It could be the case that it's invariant. It could be the case that it changes all the time. It could be the case, and if we're going to make a truth claim about it, we're saying we want some process to make that claim itself. One of the things you've been pointing out, though, is the truth of that claim. It matters how you frame the question. It matters how you frame the question, and that's what we're talking a little bit about. I know it sounds a little bit boring, but figuring out how to frame the truth-making propositions, how to frame the truth questions, is super, super important. Because there are a lot of, I'll show you this next time. I'll give you a link to it. There is a really good workout, and by the way, you're going to hear me both say very positive things about my wife's a professor, published papers and all that kind of stuff. I, for reasons of marital bliss, am a big supporter of science and the peer review process and publishing and all that kind of stuff. She's also a professor of statistics and ran for a while a lab where they did like consulting to other sciences, where they would come and say, we're doing statistical analyses on our work. Help us make sure we're using the statistics, that we're using the best methods and all that kind of stuff. Surprisingly ignorant, most people, PhDs, on how to use statistics properly, and frequently use statistics wrongly, and they would do their best to straighten that kind of stuff out. There's a very interesting YouTube video out there that I'll post up for you that basically asks the question, and this guy, by the way, that makes the video is not a Christian as far as I can tell. He's an atheist or agnostic. And his conclusion to the end of it, after talking to a bunch of people, is that most published research is wrong. When we say wrong, what it means is at least the statistical methods that they use to make the claim are incorrectly used. So you can't even make a statement like that unless you're going to make another statement that says, this is the way that statistics should be used, and these are the proper ways of doing it, and if you violate those, then you don't get the right kind of answer. So that's not to say science is wrong, but it's to say that you can't just say, well, it's in the same way that you can't say, well, it's in my Bible, and therefore it's true. You also can't say it's been peer-reviewed in a published peer-reviewed journal, and therefore it's true as well. Because a lot of the editors and publishers of peer-reviewed journals also don't understand statistical methods. Yes, sir?
Yes, but there's a very famous statement that there are lies, damn lies.
And statistics, yes. Yeah, and that's true. And one of my wife's textbooks is actually how to lie with statistics. Not because she wants her students to learn how to do that, but how to ensure that they don't do that.
Yeah, it's very important. And when you're talking about what kind of are there types of truth, statistics is a field of understanding types of truth.
Yes.
And it basically allows you to kind of migrate a truth from being unknown to being qualitative.
Yeah, let me expand on this point, right? Expand on this exact point that he's making here. Statistical truths, which by the way are most of the scientific claims that we make, these are statistical truths, are a particular class of truth. They're a class of truth that if you zoom in on this one and you say, here's a bunch of stuff right here, maybe it's the same as these, but here's a bunch of stuff in here that I actually know for a fact that I can't know exactly. And since I can't know it exactly, I'm going to make statistical arguments. I'm going to use probability theory to say this is most probably true. Or we have good reason to believe this is true because if it weren't true and things were regular, then we would expect other things to happen. Although that's kind of null hypothesis testing. So ultimately, there are things that we would say we can't know for sure, so we're going to make a statistical argument about it. In fact, you only use statistics when you don't know the truth. Let me give you another example. Hopefully this doesn't ring too familiar with too many people in the room, both for the state of your own finances and maybe for the philosophy behind it. If you go to Vegas and they lay down for you 2 cards, you're playing blackjack, and there's a king laid down, and there's and then there's another one that you don't know what it is. The mathematicians, you may have heard the story. A bunch of MIT mathematicians went to Vegas and they counted cards. They would sit there and watch the deck come out. They would count the cards that they knew, and then they would run a statistical analysis. Given the cards that are left in the deck that haven't been shown yet, and the cards that I can see, there's a something probability that the card over here will be of a certain number or will have gone over 21 or whatever else. And then they bet accordingly. And it worked so well that they won a lot of money and then immediately got banned from doing it. And the gaming entities there changed. So now it's not one deck of 52 cards anymore. Now it's like an endless number of decks constantly fed in there so that you can't do this. Why does it make any sense to bet on the cards? The cards don't change, right? It's the case like there's a king and there's an 8 there, and you have a king and you have a 9. Why wouldn't you bet? The reason that you bet, there's any betting going on at all, is because there's something that's true that you don't know. It doesn't change. The fact that there's a probability judgment going on, it doesn't change it. It just means you're ignorant about it. So we only actually use statistics when we're ignorant about all of the things that are laying out there. All right, last comment on this one, and I'll get to the next point.
I was just saying that's kind of propositionally the operation that Christianity tries to migrate me from. But the problem with faith that a lot of people have moving into faith environments that leverage faith, I should say. And the idea is that an individual entering into an environment that operates on a faith basis, even if that faith basis isn't blind, don't necessarily have inherent knowledge of notion of journey and destination. And that's kind of the idea is they're operating from an outside from a less perspective, or from a shorter-sighted individual, they're operating on a gamble, and from the larger basis of the existence of God, God says, you're not operating on a gamble, because I'm the one holding things constantly.
One of the things that we have to do, so I hope to take exception to, I think, at least the way that you were using the word faith there. He's certainly using the word faith in what he was talking about as the way that it seems to be most frequently used today in our culture. In my opinion, that is not the way that it was ever meant to be taken from scriptures, nor is it the proper use of the word faith, which I know you know, but of course you're using it as commonly used. One of the things that we do when we use standards is consistent definitions. So I intended to get to this next time, so I'll just mention it very, very briefly this time. To me, if by faith you mean blind faith, which is, hey, Scott says it, and why not? I'll believe it. I don't know anything about Scott, but he seems like an okay guy. I'll believe what he has to say. Okay, you sure that's a good idea? How do you know I'm not a real jerk? How do you know that I'm not out to harm you? Faith, to me, it should be also uniformly applied against all these kinds of truths. Religious faith should be no different than scientific faith, should be no different than academic faith, and ultimately, all of those boil down to the following thing. Tell me if I'm not right about this one. Interpersonal faith. The faith you have trust to somebody else. Let me make the point for you. Why do we trust peer-reviewed academic stuff? We have faith that the process and the individuals that are making the reviews are dedicated to the truth and are going to do the right thing. Why do we have religious faith? God says this following thing, and therefore I believe it, because I trust God. Or alternately, this preacher who knows a lot about this stuff, or theologian, says that this is the way that this is to be interpreted. I'll trust them because I have faith that they are personally reliable. When you take your fossilized rock out of the Badlands and you hand it to a lab to test it, you have faith that the lab techs in there are doing what it is that they say they will do, and they're not messing up, they're not trying to trick you, all that. There's this interpersonal faith, and it is entirely based solely on how reliable the object of your faith is, and the object of your faith is always, always a person. A person. When it comes to those kinds of statements. Now, you also have faith, as an example, in your car, which is not a person. I believe that I can hop in my car and drive it home, and it's not going to fall apart, and it's going to get me there, right? That's a kind of faith that you have in that car, but that's born of experience, as is the interpersonal stuff. So, if faith, to me, the proper definition is justified dependence in another person or thing, and that you ought to have some reason for it. And in the same way that if you saw some car that looked like it was going to fall apart, the wheels were literally going to come off of it, you would be a fool to hop in it and drive it out onto a racetrack at 200 miles an hour. So too should you be equally wise about whose statements you believe. You want to make sure that the person that you believe has established that they are in fact trustworthy. Okay, so definitions are important. We'll talk about a bunch of different definitions. So let me wrap up what we're doing today a little bit and say what we've started laying out here is what we're going to finish up next time. Now, let me beg your indulgence because I know this doesn't seem terribly interesting. And the truth of the matter is, unless you're really, really into the philosophy stuff, this is not that interesting. I get it. But if you don't do this first, you will not ever be able to come to the right answer when it comes to evaluating truth, because you will be inconsistent. You will be inconsistent. In the same way that if you weren't trained in the scientific method, this is what the scientific method is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then when you go to use it, you'll use it inconsistently. In the same way that if there's a method of interpretation that academics use to evaluate ancient texts, they have a series of standards and steps. If you don't do that, you will get a different answer than the other people will. If there's a mystical system that one uses to interpret truth, if you don't stick by the process of the mystical system, you won't come up with the same result each time, potentially. So it's the case that we want to make sure that we do this right so that when we ask the interesting questions, we're not running around in circles. Let me give you a kind of an example of this to justify why I'm subjecting you to this, so to speak. If it's the case that, let me ask, does anybody have an example that they would like to bring up?
What's the subject of the question?
Why is it important to have consistent standards when you're asking a question?
People are starting on the same page, so you can speak in the same
And
language.
what's an example of that not going correctly?
Using statistics. No, seriously, you're using certain numbers, and if people have different, they may be thinking that they're gonna get the answer to something that is different, or they're, instead of characterizing a set of numbers.
All right, let me give you a great, yes, to Steve's point. Steve's right. You go into your doctor, and he's just administered a cancer test to you. And he says to you, hey, I've got this cancer test. I think some of your symptoms look like you might have this kind of rare form of cancer. Only one person in 100,000 has this form of cancer, but you might have it, so we're going to give you a test. The test is 90% accurate at identifying. If you have the cancer and we give you this test, 90% of the time it makes the right call. And you're like, all right, that sounds pretty good. And he tests you, and he comes back the next week, and he's like, I got bad news. You tested positive right here. What should you do at this point? What should you do? Now, what he didn't define, he didn't go all the way in and define everything that he said there, but he gave you a couple of clues. The rate of occurrence of this is 1 in 100,000. 1 in 100,000 people have this type of cancer. That means 999,999 out of 100,000 don't have it. What's the correct test rate? That is to say, true positives, 90% of the time. That means how often do you get a false positive? 10% of the time. What's 10% of 100,000? 10,000. For every one correct cancer test that correctly says you've got this kind of cancer, there are 10,000 results that are false positives. Now, do you want to go get chemo? Or do you want another test, a second kind of test? All right? So it sounds, in the way that we normally do business, if you don't think about prior probabilities, you might just say, oh, well, it sounds like I got cancer. It's very important for the doctor to have framed that properly for you. It's very important for him to give you the context. He gave you the information you needed to make the mathematical argument, but if you're not well versed in Bayesian probability, you might have come up with the wrong solution there. And most of us aren't, right? I'm not. Like, I know that one example, but if you ask me to do that continually, I'm probably going to get that wrong. This is why it's very, very important. In this case, this is the difference between you blowing off the diagnosis or getting a second test and going through rounds of chemo and radiation therapy that are going to significantly impact your quality of life, right? It's not a life, it may be a life and death decision, but knowing the framing, knowing what the truth claims are, knowing the process of discovering the truth, and knowing the standards we used in that one case is hugely impactful of your lives. Now, if the game you're playing for is this, what happens to us after we die? What should I do with my life? What's going to make me happy? That's all three of those questions are at least as important as do I have cancer? So doesn't it make sense that we want to spend a little bit of time trying to understand the processes that we use and the standards that we use? That's my argument for why we should. We'll finish this off next time, and then we'll get to the real meat of the stuff the time after that. Yes, sir. Sorry, you had your hand up. No? Did you want to make one comment? Yes, sir. You. You had your hand up.
It was about when you were asking what should people do if they have cancer.
Yes.
It seemed like, yeah, they should seek treatment. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 11, so I know a little bit.
Amen to that, but you want to understand the diagnosis of the treatment so that you can make the best informed treatment. And if this class is going to do anything, we want to ask the question, how do we ascertain our current state? Do we have cancer? Do we not have cancer? Are we A or B? And then what is the treatment? What are the results? What should we do? To your point about treatment, that's actually a really, really profound point if you think about it. We can sit here and debate the truth of all this stuff. We can decide, hey, the Orthodox Jews have got this exactly right. You guys are 100% right. And then we walk out of the class and we don't follow any of the Torah. What does that mean, right? We have an intellectual assent, but we have no faith. We have no follow-through. We have no belief in it. So if these guys are right, you should be dressing like them. You should be acting like them. You should be doing everything that they do, and maybe more. God forbid that you guys are not perfect law keepers, but if you aren't, then keep all the law. But if that's the case, then you will do what they do. You will walk like they walk. Same thing is true of the Christians, same thing is true of the Muslims, same thing is true of the atheist, etc. Yes, sir, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Some forms of cancer are like the cancers, or like if it's a rare type. Sometimes it's the place you go to get the treatment for. Like in some other countries actually have a method to actually treat and take care of cancer. American doctors usually say, "Oh, it's draconian." So.
I will admit that I'm 100% unqualified to comment on that one, so I'll take you at your word on that one. But yeah, you may be right for all I know. Yes, sir.
So at the end of this exercise,
Oops. Yes, sir.
are we supposed to all in this room hold to the same standard? Or, because I'll tell you, when I have conversations with people, I can use different standards depending on whatever we're talking about.
So, by the way, if somebody makes that assertion and they're correct, beware, because it means they're a skilled debater. So the best debaters, in my opinion, don't just argue with you from their own viewpoint. They can also take up your standards and show you that you're inconsistent with them. That is, in fact, exactly what we will be doing in this class. Is what we're saying is, let's say, Effie and Asher say, this is my standard for the process of discovering truth, and this is my standard for what truth is. It doesn't, and let's say Peter says, well, my standard is this one, and looks like A, and this one looks like B, and A and B are not the same. It's a fool's errand to turn around and then have an argument, because you've got different standards of truth. What you say is, if I believe A, is this consistent? If I believe B, is this consistent? So we are going to be interested in two things, and now I'm getting into this stuff for next time, so I'll at least put a teaser trailer in to say this. We will answer this question very detailed, because all you guys have seen people talking past each other, you've seen debates going past each other, it all happens for exactly the reason that he's saying right here. People do not identify that they're working by different standard systems and they just talk right past each other. We will not do that in this class. If you're going to hold standard system B, we're going to argue on standard system B. If you're going to hold standard system A, we're going to argue based on standard system A. At some point, we will also to bounce B and A off of the consistent process of discovering truth, or both of these is right or wrong. And if you do nothing else over the next month, do that right, and you will find yourself way more successful at discovering truth than if you don't. All right. Hopefully we'll see anybody that's interested on this Saturday. Do RSVP so Ashley knows what to do. Thanks again for coming out, guys. We'll also talk. You're welcome every time. We hope to have you every time. But if your schedule doesn't permit that, let's dialogue with you, me, and Peter about when is the best time for you guys to make your core presentations as well. Okay. Thank you all very much. God be with you this week, and we'll see you next time.